So tonight, we are very excited. We actually have the pleasure of having 3 speakers. So I will announce them together, and then if they want to give a little bit more detail on what their positions are, they can do that. We of course, have, as many of you are familiar, our state attorney, Ed Brodsky. We have a new member, our new member, Lisa Chitterow. And she is a part of the white collar division here in Bradenton, Florida. We also have Dan Uter. And he is a part of the white collar division in Sarasota. So we are very excited. They're going to, of course, tell us a little bit more about themselves as necessary. But I would love to welcome them, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. It's a great crowd, and hopefully we'll have a wonderful discussion with you, and we'll talk about a lot of great things. As Commissioner DeSabatino talked about the creation of this unit, I like to refer to it as, I've heard it referred to as, when we merged white collar with our animal division, and which was interesting in how we came about doing that, but we like to refer to it as puppies and paper clips. And interestingly, we saw that there was a need to create the white collar unit, and there was also a need in our communities to create an animal unit dealing with the abuse of animals. And budgets being what they are, if the salaries of the state attorney's office or the budget of the state attorney's office was unlimited, then certainly in a perfect world, we would have certainly created 2 different units. But when we created the units, both of the individuals when we began were very interested in doing both areas. And ironically, the 2 units have married, and they've been very harmonious with one another. We recently saw with Nate's rescue and the prosecution of that case that Napier. Thank you. When we began with Nate's, we don't want to say anything bad about Nate's. I actually adopted a dog from Nate's. But with Napier's, what we saw is that case, when we began the investigation of that case and the prosecution of that case had the animal component to it, and there was also a financial component to it. So the 2 actually married very well together, and we were able to move forward on that case. Tonight, I want to thank you all for having me here, and to have Lisa Chitterow and Dan Uter here to speak about fraud and embezzlement and exploitation. We thought that the purpose of tonight was really twofold. It's really about vigilance, being vigilant, doing what we can to make sure that we're not victims of fraud or embezzlement or exploitation. So it's about vigilance, and it's about prevention. Those are the things that I would suggest to you are key here. And as we look at where we are today, we've certainly seen, and I think all of you would agree, that we are very technological today. Technology has certainly advanced our society beyond any means when I was a young child and what I remember doing. Getting up to change the TV channels, only had like 3 or 4 channels to watch, and now kids have an infinite number of channels to watch. Remote control. You can set your television, you can set recording all by your phone or an iPad or from your computer. You can do it from, out of state. I recently recorded a show and set it to record back home when I was in Washington for a conference. So I think technology is just outstanding. But what we've seen is what have we seen with technology? We now have online banking. God forbid we don't have to lick envelopes and put stamps on bills. We can renew our driver's license online. We can pay for our registration for our motor vehicle. We can pay our income taxes. We can do so many things now with the advent of technology. But what we've seen, though, because of all these technological advances, right, we're all behind computer screens, we're behind our iPhones or our iPads or our cell phones, and so now there is an increasing age of thefts that are occurring because of our electronic era that we're in. And so we're seeing internet crimes, folks that are committing a variety of crimes on the internet. We're seeing a larger amount of consumer fraud, goods and services that are being provided to us through the internet that are not what they are supposed to be. And we've seen a greater amount of credit card fraud. And we're seeing income tax fraud that's occurring. Unfortunately, that's been very prevalent. Identities have been stolen, and income tax returns have been filed with IRS. So we're seeing a significant increase in that. Here locally, we've seen that at the ATM machines, that we're all careful about our data and our information being stolen when we use our ATM cards at the bank. You've seen stories about at the gas pump where skimmers are being used to steal your data. We worry now when we make a credit card transaction, we pay with a credit card or an ATM card at a restaurant. We worry about whether or not our information has been, they've used a skimmer or some sort of a device to steal that data and then to be able to make fraudulent transactions. So we need to be aware of all of those things. Some people, you know, what we've noticed, particularly with businesses, is that there seems to be a tolerance because we want to satisfy the customer, right? Customer is always right, and customer satisfaction is always paramount. So how often when you go to the store and you use a credit card, do you see that they ask for your identification? Almost never, right? Almost never. So some folks actually put, you know, where on the signature line they may put "see identification," you know, requiring the clerk to ask for your identification. And even then, sometimes they don't do it, because I have some of my prosecutors that have that on their cards, and oftentimes they don't ask even when that's on there. But it's all about satisfying the consumer so that they're happy, they're pleased, that the transaction is efficient. And sometimes, you know, they write off some losses as a cost of doing business. And we've experienced that at the prosecutors at our office with, you know, why do you do this? Why do you have some of these practices that seem to be enabling or encouraging fraudulent activity or criminal activity? It's about customer satisfaction and being able and willing to absorb the loss as a cost of doing business. So we've recently seen, you know, that merchants are now doing some things to try to prevent credit card theft, to prevent some of the skimming of your data from your magnetic strip. You know, now they're starting to put those square chips on the credit card. They featured that on a news story I saw last night, but they're beginning to use that. I've now gone to the store and I swipe my card and they tell you, no, you can't swipe your card. You have to put the credit card with the chip into the device. And you have to sit there and wait for it to read and authorize it. But the good thing about that is it makes it harder for credit card fraud to occur. And so it's something that's harder to commit fraud with. And as we look nationally around the country, around the United States, you guys just eat without me, okay? It's okay. No, I'm just kidding. But as we look around the nation and we look at some of the things that are occurring, we see that there are these things going on. But then we also see that these things occur here at home, right? And there's been a couple examples that we've seen in the newspapers here locally. Some of them are being prosecuted at the state level. Some of them are being prosecuted at the federal level. We work very closely with our federal counterparts in criminal prosecutions of these types of cases. So these are pending cases, so they're alleged to have committed criminal violations. But some of the things that we've seen. Recently there was a financial accounting manager with a medical practice here in town. And if you saw that, right, Coastal, responsible for losses of about $860,000. Obtaining gift cards, getting gift cards through the business. We also saw that someone that was the treasurer for the Sarasota Youth Baseball League was arrested for embezzlement of some of the funds during the concession stands. Recently, we saw that there was a law enforcement conducted an unlicensed contractor sting. And that's been something that law enforcement's been very driven and determined to pursue, are those that are preying on folks performing work, handyman repairs in homes, electrical work in homes, and that they're not licensed contractors, and that they're performing work that can be actually dangerous to the homeowner because it's not to code, it's not to violation, it's substandard work that can actually harm people. So law enforcement conducted a sting recently, and I think there was approximately 9 folks that were arrested in that operation, and we've participated closely with law enforcement in those operations. We also saw that there was a broker on Anna Marie Island that was arrested for taking deposits and proceeds towards rent for non-existent units. So these things are occurring nationally and at the local level, and we need to be vigilant, and we need to act to make sure that we prevent these things from occurring. So prevention is the key. So I took office in January 2013, and I'll tell you that it was at that time that we realized that with the prevalence of fraud and embezzlement and exploitation of the elderly, that what we needed to do was work closer with law enforcement. We needed to identify these types of cases and work with law enforcement from the very inception so that when they begin investigating these types of cases, that they can work closely with us so that we can assist them in any way during the course of their investigation. Because the ultimate goal is we want to make sure that we do a sound investigation so that when it ends up in court, that justice is served. And so in addition to that, working closely with law enforcement during the inception of these investigations, we've also collaborated with law enforcement agencies. We meet with these investigators. And Lisa Chitterow and Dan Uter meet with these investigators from all the different law enforcement agencies, including federal law enforcement agencies, to discuss topical issues, trends dealing with white-collar crime, so that we're all working together and that we're knowledgeable about the issues that are going on and how to successfully prosecute these cases. And I think that, and Lisa and Dan can talk to you a little bit about this, but I think that around the state, other agencies have taken notice of some of the things that we've been doing in addressing white-collar crime, and we've become a model in this industry as to how to handle these cases. White-collar cases are what we refer to as the paper clips, right? They're different than an armed robbery, a sexual battery, a shooting that occurs, right? Sometimes a prosecutor that gets those cases, those are glamorous cases for a prosecutor, right? Those are the kind of cases that you can sink your teeth into and get excited about because you really want to make a difference in combating those types of crimes and prosecuting the individuals that commit those crimes. White-collar cases are paper-intensive, they're difficult, they're audit-intensive. You have to follow the trail. People go to great lengths. They don't just openly embezzle funds from their employer and leave the documents laying out. They try to hide their trace. They want to be undetected. They want to go as long as they can. You don't get to steal $860,000 by making it obvious that you're doing it, right? So you have to be able to uncover the steps that someone has taken to uncover the depths of the fraud that's occurred. And so those are some of the things that we work very hard to do. In addition, I think part of our responsibility, I think as prosecutors and as part of this white-collar unit, is doing exactly what we're doing, is going to public forums, going to events, because prosecuting on the back end is something that we do. That's our responsibility. But as I said, vigilance and prevention is what we also believe in. If we can arm people and educate people about being vigilant, to also be aware about prevention, if we can prevent crime, then I think we have successfully done what we want to do. We want to prosecute crime when it occurs, but if we can also educate and prevent crime, we're better off. All of us are better off. So we're working hard in that area. By the way, I applaud both of them because, they both have, it's an enormous task. They have a lot of duties and responsibilities with the white collar. And as both, there have been a lot of important cases in the animal community. So I think their plates are full. They have a lot of cases going on. And when an animal case occurs, there is certainly an outcry from the community. There's a lot of reaction. I get lots of emails when someone hurts an animal. Dr. Vega once said when we talked about oxycodone deaths, about 6, 7 deaths a day across the state of Florida at that time during the height of oxycodone, there weren't a lot of people saying much about that. And so Dr. Vega had a great analogy that if 6 or 7 manatees washed up on shore, there'd be public outcry, right? If we saw 6 or 7 manatees washing up on the beach dead every day. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit before I bring up Lisa Chittero and Dan Uter. I wanted to just talk to you about some of the things that I've seen and I think that we've seen predominantly that keeps occurring, that there's a theme and I'll talk to business owners, those that are running businesses. We've seen a lot of cases. We just talked about the case from the medical facility. But we've seen in the business arena that there are a large number of cases that come to us with employees embezzling. And oftentimes it goes on for a number of years before it's detected. There are those businesses that are fortunate that sometimes they detect it early. But oftentimes we find that it can be undetected for a number of years and there can be significant losses that can hurt certainly the bottom line of that agency or that department. So as we look at those things, some of the things that businesses can do that oftentimes we wonder why they don't do, but things that can be done to prevent businesses from suffering losses is most often what we find with businesses that suffer these losses is that they have one person or one individual that's responsible for handling the finances of that agency. And so one critical thing that any business can do is to move away from a format where one person is responsible for receiving cash, checks, proceeds for that business and making the deposits and paying all the bills. What they need to have is at least an additional person that is also going to reconcile bank statements, credit card statements, and make sure that the books are in order. And so if you add an additional person to reconcile the books of the business, we think that that's a significant step that can be taken to root out any type of fraud and certainly raise a flag as to whether or not there's any suspicious activity that raises some question for the agency to look further into it. Businesses can also set up with their financial institutions email alerts that'll let them know that if there's a check of a particular amount, they could set a threshold that they can be notified if the business has written a check exceeding an amount, and they can certainly be notified if deposits on hand at the institution or the business drop below a certain level. But the most important thing, I think, is that there be an additional person to reconcile bank statements and credit card statements. Then as we talk about individuals, each of us, homeowners, consumers, in our personal daily lives, we see a lot of cases dealing with folks that want to come by your house and provide services to you at your residence, right, or in your personal life, whether it's tree trimming, or if it's working on your driveway or doing roof repairs. I mean, we talked about unlicensed contractors. We want to make sure that the folks that we're hiring to do these types of jobs are licensed professionals to do the work. We also want to make sure that the biggest thing that we often see is someone has come to them and they've retained them to provide some sort of service for them, and they pay them a large amount, if not 100%, in advance, in cash or check for the services. And then what happens? What do you think happens? right? They either don't do the work, right? Or they perform the work in a substandard fashion, or they do part of the job. And you've already paid them in full, so what are your recourses? Oh, I'm going to sue you, right? And by then they're gone. And then what are your chances of getting your money back? Not good. So I would certainly strongly suggest that you not pay anyone, any service provider, in advance, in cash or check. I try to make that a rule. I learned that lesson myself. So I'm here to tell you. I had a good relationship with someone that did some yard work for me, and he asked me to pay him in advance that one time, and I did. And he promised me that he would be there the next day to do the work. And did he show up? No, he didn't. Thank goodness I had a very vigilant wife who pursued him to the ends of the earth, and we got our money back. But not everybody's that lucky. Not everybody's that lucky. So, but I'll tell you something that happened to me, and I've heard about it happening to other attorneys in my office. So we're not immune to fraud. We're not immune to these types of things occurring to us. But thankfully, I was reviewing my bank statements, and I noticed that there was some fraudulent activity just recently on my credit card, or actually on my ATM card. My wife, it was kind of comical because my wife yelled at me about it and said, "I told you not to use your ATM card everywhere." And of course I was, I like to use my ATM card. And it turned out when I called the institution and they wanted to know the credit card number, it turned out that it was her ATM card. So that's a story that I truly enjoyed. Luckily the bank took care of us, and luckily the charges were not significant. But the most important thing I learned from that is how important it is that we review our credit card statements, that we review our banking statements. I very carefully look at those, and because I'm not the only one using the ATM card and I'm not the only one using the credit card, sometimes I don't know what the transactions are, right? My wife uses it. Thank goodness my children aren't using them. But so I will ask my wife if I see something that's out of the ordinary or suspicious. So it's important to carefully review those bank statements and those credit card statements to make sure that there's not anything out of order. And I'm sure like you, now it seems like whatever account you create, you have to create a password, right? A username and a password. And some of us may think, well, I'm going to use the same username and I'm going to use the same password for all my accounts, right? How many do that? No, don't tell us. But see, the important thing is that we don't do that, and you don't want to, it's like they tell you, don't name it after your dog, don't make it really simple, don't make it super easy, so that if there is someone that's trying to access your accounts, that it's very easy for them to figure it out, right? They say a lot of people, their password is their pet's name. Who wants to admit to that? All right. So, and you have to be careful about that. That's really important, not to do that. And you have to securely store your passwords. I probably have over 100 passwords, and you have to securely store them. Don't make it very difficult for anyone to find them or to have access to them. Change them frequently, every day. I just want to see if anybody's listening. I just wanted to see if you're listening. Those are some things that we see and that we think can help prevent fraud and exploitation. At this time, I'm going to turn it to my experts, Lisa Chitterow and Dan Uter, and since there's a podium and we're not mic'd up, I think I'll bring Lisa Chitterow to start, and she can make her remarks to you. Thank you.
I guess he looked at me first, so he thought he'd call me up first. Ed gave a lot of good advice on how to prevent fraud and how to prevent this, and I guess it was. I didn't realize it was already 2013, that long ago, and the day that he decided to create this, which I think was the day after you got sworn in or pretty close to it, is he called me into the office, and I thought, God, I'm already in trouble. He said, I'm thinking I'm going to open up. I'm going to create the white collar animal abuse division, and would you like to do it? I said, Ed, do you really think we have enough fraud around? He, well, now in 2016, I'll tell you that I spend most of my all day long, nights, weekends, and I can't keep up with it. And Dan, is probably the same thing, if not worse, in Sarasota, is there is unfortunately a lot of business that keeps us extremely busy. There probably should be 5 of Dan and I's to keep up with what's going on. So ideally, if we can give you any tips to prevent it and to stop it from happening to you, that'd be great. And it's 1 in 5 is going to be a victim of fraud. Ed was a victim. I have a police report in my purse. I was just a victim. Someone used my credit card. I had my credit card in my purse. Someone used my credit card in Clearwater, had something delivered. And so see if anything turns up from that investigation from that. Ed also mentioned the work from home. And it was Commissioner DeSabatino. We've had a great relationship with the commissioners. We often work with the commissioners and do these outreach programs and talk to as many people in the community as possible to try to let you know what's going on, what to watch out for, so you don't become a victim of fraud. And I think it was, we were at a town hall meeting, and one of the things that people were very surprised with, it was a gated community where people can come in, or they're not very secure, is that what people didn't realize, and let me know if any of you have had it, is that someone goes to your door and says, hey, I just did your neighbor's lawn. I did a great job. I've got my equipment and everything. Would you like to have that done? And everyone's nodding their head. You can't do that. It's a second-degree misdemeanor. For you to solicit without being invited to, that is a second-degree misdemeanor. You must have a permit. Remember, Robin, the people were very surprised. I forget where we were, but it was, oh yeah, I had someone do my lanai. I had someone do my driveway. Is you cannot solicit without a permit. That statute, and it was a few years ago when I looked at it, to get a permit you have to go to the Manatee County Clerk's office. And to date, since the opening of the Manatee County Clerk's office, guess how many permits have been issued for solicitation? Yes, one permit, that's it. And in Sarasota, I don't know how many, so anyone who's coming to your house, they're not supposed to be doing that. You had the right guess. If I had a prize, I'd give you that. You just guessed number 1. You'll be all set, but as long as we split. Some of the other things, the internet, especially our iPhones, which mine's probably laying around somewhere, is we rely more and more on our phones, whether they're a Droid or an iPhone, is that everything's in it. I use mine for everything. I can access my work email, I can pay my bills, I can check my account balances. What a lot of people don't understand about the iPhones, and I just learned it a couple of months ago, just when I think maybe I understand how this whole fraud thing works and I can not have to call my financial institution again and tell them I was a victim of fraud, is that the iPhones, all the different apps on it that you can use, is there's what's called push notifications on there, and what that does is it sends your location, exactly where you're at. Mine right now, if I pulled it up, Dan could go on his phone and he could do some quick little app that he can get at the App Store, and he could find my exact location where I'm at. Even though I have my GPS turned off, maybe I've got my phone turned off completely, those push notifications tell people where you're at. It doesn't take, and we've seen it a lot, wondering how in the world, I mean, Dan probably does it too, is every day I spend my day wondering, you know, especially when we have these monthly luncheons with law enforcement, is just when we think we have it all figured out, we have all the scams, it's nope, there's a new one. It takes very little information for somebody to be able to get your enough identification to open up a credit card, to open up a bank statement, to assume your identity, and you won't even know what's going on. And that is absolutely terrifying how easy it is to do. Things like Facebook, social media that many of us use, I think. little things on there. It has your name, it has your picture, there's little bits of information. From that, just on open media, there's different apps, and I was doing it this afternoon in there, and I was using my own name, and I was able to find my address, where I bank, my telephone number, who lives in my house, everything that's supposed to be protected by Florida statute, and it took me all of about 5 minutes to find this out. And that's just generally out there on the internet, just to give you an idea just how exposed we really are. The best way, and over the last few years, I've thought about what is the best way to protect yourself from the unknown scammer, the one who's targeting you. And can anyone guess who the targets are for a scammer? Especially seniors, but otherwise every single one of us. Unfortunately for seniors, the older we get, the more likely that someone will try to gain your trust. Trust is their weapon, and that they will try to take absolutely every penny you have. And the cases, and Dan and I did a trial with one, is that there is absolutely no remorse for it. Is they're going to befriend you, use that trust, they're going to take their time, they're extremely stealthy and clever predators. Once that trust is gained, they will take absolutely everything. And I left some pamphlets for everyone on some of the cases, more serious ones that we tried. I think I got off topic a bit with that case. It's every one of us will be a target, is potentially a target. It's international. There's people all over the world that have access to the computer. They're just sitting at home. And in Turkey, we found one. The Homeland Security tracked it down. The computer was in Greenland. From Greenland, there was another computer in Turkey. And these are just computers sitting in a shed. But it was actually tracked down to find out who the scammer was. And that's what's called the dark net, is that everything is scrambled so that it can't be tracked. We can't track the IP address to find out who it is. So it is an international epidemic problem. In the brochures that were provided, the green ones, Ed chose green because it means money. So that was a good choice. I think he spent a lot of time. He spent a lot of time thinking about the shade and everything. So the green one is money. The best way and the most productive way that you can protect yourself is that on annualcreditreport.com. That is a free site. It is required by law that you are entitled to check your credit reports once per year. What's suggested is that, say, every 3 months, 4 months, you go on annualcreditreport.com, check your Equifax report. Especially check for things like inquiries or aliases, because if someone spells your name wrong or tries to open up a new account, it's going to be there. Those 3 credit reports it's ground zero for your information. It holds absolutely everything. So look for inquiries, look for accounts that are not yours, and that's where you'll initially see perhaps some suspicious activity. If you do, I strongly do urge that you contact law enforcement as fast as you see it. Also put a freeze on it. The credit reports will do a fraud alert. There's one on my account, so basically every time someone looks into something, including me, I get a notification that my credit's been pulled or there's been something looked at. But I guess I wanted to test out a few of these scams myself to see how bad it was, so I've probably been more of a victim than anyone else in here.
My assistant just got a letter from IRS that said that their account had been attacked and that they were just to contact the credit department and just tell them. And so she called them today, and they had no, it was just like, we don't know anything, we just tell you, it's crazy.
We do get together, the IRS, and I got a call, the IRS scam, there's always an IRS scam, because is there anything more terrifying than picking up the phone and hearing, hey, this is Agent Smith with the IRS? I got one of those calls that scared the pants off of me. It was when I was off sick for a while, and I got the call. I wasn't feeling well. Well, I answered the phone when I wasn't doing anything else. But it was, hey, this is Agent Smith with the IRS. And I thought, oh, no. And then I thought maybe it was work-related, but then it was, they had just enough information on me that they could have gotten from the internet. Don't you work at the state attorney's office? Don't you live over on that road? And I said, yes, yes. And they said, well, you have some unlawful information on your computer. We're going to come and arrest you. And it was, why would the IRS care what's on my computer? So I knew it was a scam. So I said, well, can I have your number, your badge number, your ID, and I'll give you a call back. The number he gave was 305 area code, which is a scam that is going on right now. The caller, even though it's 305, is actually out of the country, and it's not from the IRS at all. So when someone calls you, and that's in the pamphlet, is that if someone calls you and said, hey, something's been compromised, is to call the known number. Like if you have a Bank of America credit card, and the bank calls, you get an email, looks very official, Bank of America, your card's been compromised, call us right away. Respond to us, just give us your password, whatever information, give them absolutely nothing. And don't respond to the email, because as soon as you respond to that email, they now have access to all your information. Sorry, Charles, I hit your mic. It's call a known number. If it's a financial institution you deal with, call the known number. The IRS, look it up, call the known number, verify that it's a legitimate letter, legitimate email, and that will protect you, excuse me, from anything they may be trying to get. Who, the IRS? There's so many different letters and emails that come out. I mean, does anyone really think that they have a relative in Nigeria that's leaving them, $64 bazillion? It's coming from all over the place, and that's why it's absolutely verified, every single thing, and we have to trust each other to be able to function in life. There's no way around it, and it's important that we do trust each other. But it's also, like Ed said, be diligent, be vigilant. You look at everything and just double check and be sure.
My secretary doesn't use her PIN number. She always uses her debit card as a credit card.
Yeah.
She said that makes it safer. Do you have any opinion on that?
Dan does. Actually, he just brought it up, so I'll bring him up. Dan and I were just talking about that today, and he's done some research on that.
Yeah, that's kind of. Thank you, everybody, for allowing us to be here. I'm going to get to that kind of towards the end, but that is something that I would recommend. My name is Dan Uter. I'm a prosecutor with the State Attorney's Office here in the 12th Circuit. I do the white-collar, elderly exploitation, and the animal abuse cases in Sarasota. We do call it puppies and paper clips, but sometimes, kind of within house, sometimes if I'm having, if it's a bad day, it becomes paper cuts and puppies. And, that's just from the amount of cases that we get and the amount of, work that we get from the amount of fraud that's going on in the area. I wanted to kind of talk about the most common types of cases that we prosecute, that we get. I've grouped them up in different categories. Ed's talked about some of them, but I think the number one crime that I seem to get in front of my desk is employee fraud, and essentially it typically involves a person who is in a position of trust, whether it be an accountant or a bookkeeper, and usually they have the ability to either access the checking, they have the ability to print the checks out, or they have some sort of signator abilities. What they typically do as far as hiding these crimes is a lot of times they've got access to the QuickBooks account that's part of the company, and they actually, and I've had this several times, and I never would have even thought of this, they change the vendor names of the checks. So in other words, when they're issuing these checks out, they'll actually balance within their QuickBooks legitimate vendors, depending on what the business is, and then therefore it's never found until like a year-end review because the money is actually being accounted for within their financial software. So until, and this is obviously for companies that have, more profit and money going in and out, it's not until the very end of the year, or it's at least some point when they're, I don't know, a lot of times something else happens and they end up getting removed from position. They go through the books and say, this does seem to match, but this didn't actually happen. And a lot of times the vendors will contact the actual employer and confirm that they never got a check and this wasn't an actual transaction. The other kind of case I get a lot is charitable organization fraud. A lot of charities, I've had firefighter benevolent fund fraud. I've had different types of lodges. I've had all kinds of different charities that have been the victims of fraud. And again, they're almost always somebody within the group. And they're always somebody who is either an accountant or a bookkeeper. The difference being that a lot of times these people have even more control. They have both the ability to write the checks or be a part of the account and some operational ability, which means that they're also making the decisions as to what's being purchased. The problem is there's not a lot of checks and balances in a lot of charities, so it's, again, easier to perpetuate the fraud. And one of the key things about fraud in general is that there's sort of two different sort of components that will equal potential for fraud. And one is the ability, and that's essentially knowing how to commit the fraud. And the other, and I think this is important, isn't so much, it's the perception of opportunity. And I think that's important because it's not just the opportunity, it's the perception of opportunity. And I believe that that's something that we can talk about towards the end too, but it's not, it's basically if the perpetrator believes they can commit a fraud, then they more likely will. Probably the most important to everybody in the room as far as the groups of cases that we get is consumer credit card fraud. And that's something I want to talk about. Typically by the time we get the case, or early on in the case, the victim is now the credit card company because they've now compensated the actual credit card holder. Now, obviously, that ultimately comes back to all of us because that's where our interest rates come from, that's where our fees come from. So even though it may not be an out-of-pocket direct expense, it still obviously impacts everybody that has a credit card. And that seems to be the most common. I think probably, I would guess, at least 90% of us have gotten some sort of phone call from your credit card company saying that, did you authorize these transactions? Or some sort of indication that there's been a fraud perpetuated on your credit card. I had one probably, I think I was 2 months into working in the white collar division. I was actually, and this is just annoying me so much, I'm literally in the office working on a fraud case. I want to say it was a credit card fraud case, and I get like one of those text alerts saying, did you authorize this, this transaction? And it was from, I have a Best Buy card, and the thing with the Best Buy card, it's not even a Visa, it's just, you can only use that card in the store. So it had to have been somebody who got that information from Best Buy or online. It wasn't something, I wouldn't use it anywhere else. So I'm sitting there, working through my fraud cases, and I get that, and I had no idea how they would have gotten that information other than an employee at Best Buy. I don't know. So anyway, I had to deal with that, which is just doubly frustrating while I'm trying to prevent fraud, or as I'm getting that call. A lot of times the cases that we get involving credit card fraud are actually begun by the merchants themselves. So, and usually the big stores, Target and Walmart, they generally have loss prevention programs within their stores, and they start to recognize the type of activity that is a sort of an alert for fraud, and that usually would be somebody who comes and has multiple credit cards. I mean, we all have probably some. But these are people that come in with 5 to 10 credit cards, and they just swipe a few and they don't work, and then they keep doing that. Now, that in and of itself isn't necessarily a crime, but it certainly puts the red flags up. And these stores communicate with each other, so they will generally say, hey, is this person, they'll describe the person, or maybe have the name. Did this person come in and to your store? Because sometimes they'll go to the different Targets in the area. They'll go to multiple Targets, and they'll stay in touch. And ultimately, law enforcement will be contacted from the stores themselves. And then they start, surveilling them, and ultimately, that's how they get caught. So, some of the other things too is they will buy gift cards. Gift cards is and which makes sense. I mean, if someone's going to use a stolen credit card to buy, whatever, clothing or something else, and they have to find the market for that, typically they may not make a profit. But a gift card it's face value. I mean, you can easily get profit from that if you're a criminal using somebody else's card. So that's another thing that they look at: multiple cards, multiple transactions, declined, and if they're buying lots and lots of gift cards, like hundreds of dollars worth. They know all these things because they're trained in this, and then law enforcement knows it, and then we know it because we get these cases. We've got different kinds of charges that we file to address credit card fraud. Trafficking in credit cards is one, and that basically is possessing 10 or more cards that are counterfeit. We have thefts. You can generally charge grand theft. Unlawful use of personal identification information. These are all the types of crimes that we actually, we address the credit card. Credit card fraud is just sort of a broad umbrella of these types of crimes. Identity theft is similar to credit card fraud in that identity theft can be any form of identifying information. It can be your name, your address, or your credit card number, and it's a criminal use of that information to commit a crime. And a lot of times when we get these credit card fraud cases, that's something that we charge, because if the person's using your credit card number, they're using, in a sense, your identity, and that actually triggers identity theft. The other types of cases that we get a lot of is, unfortunately, exploitation of the elderly. Now, this type of case, when I say this is normally or typically, there's always exceptions to everything. I mean, there's no such thing as a real typical case, as anybody that's been at the state attorney's office long enough knows that there's always some unique curveball that's thrown at us. But with exploitation of the elderly cases, they're commonly perpetuated by the caregivers. And when I say caregiver, it's usually an unrelated person who is actually employed as some sort of home health care aide. And a lot of times our victims are people that are somehow isolated from their close families, whether just through distance or just out-of-state relatives, and so they're not there every single day. And these suspects, these defendants, they prey on the vulnerable, and they know what to look for. And a lot of times the crimes are actually committed just by having access to their checks, their credit cards, or debit cards. And a lot of times they will sort of intermingle legitimate, when I say legitimate, I mean, some care items for the victim, but then you start seeing personal use, and that seems to perpetuate and go on and get greater as they realize they can do that. That's the perception of opportunity that I was talking about. And this is the case that Lisa referred to. This was a case that we prosecuted, went to trial on in Arcadia. Depending on how vulnerable the victim is and how far they think they can take this, it can escalate to obtaining title to the victim's car, to their house, to being put in the will. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes we don't get these cases until the victim has passed. So then the family comes in and sees what's gone on, and then we have to basically, we look through these things and see, oh my gosh, I can't believe how far they got, and then that's all part of that scheme. There's other kinds of frauds that we prosecute. A lot of these other frauds are not necessarily towards like a citizen. They're like directed towards either an agency or a licensing body. We get insurance fraud cases a lot. We get an insurance fraud can essentially be a false claim. I've had cases where someone's called in, they've reported an accident and they weren't really in an accident. And trust me, these insurance companies, they've got some pretty hardcore investigators that are, I've had cases with, engineering reports and, physics that I'm like, gosh, that's helpful. Sales tax fraud, when you own a business and you essentially don't report, that's more of, you're not submitting the sales tax that you're earning, and that is that's a state case that we get. Unlicensed contractor cases, we talked about that a little bit. And the reason I'm bringing these up sort of in a group is that, yes, they're not typically involving one citizen or one person, but the idea is that they impact us. Insurance fraud, our insurance rates go up. Sales tax fraud, potentially our taxes could go up. Unlicensed contractor cases, these these are put into place to protect the consumer, to protect the homeowner. And if these individuals aren't complying with being licensed, then those are the types of people that will commit other kinds of fraud. Workers' compensation fraud, the same thing. If, not necessarily impacting somebody directly, but certainly impacts us indirectly. We get title fraud cases. A lot of times we get that from Florida Highway Patrol. People, when they're selling cars, they mislead about their title. And securities fraud, which is essentially investments, some misrepresentation about an investment. But I want to get back to the credit card issues a little bit, because that's probably the most pertinent type of fraud that everybody's been a part of, and probably impacts us most directly. The new technology it's been around probably for years in Europe, but this is now something that's becoming more common in our cards, is the chip technology. And it's actually very important today, because on October 1st, we have a very big day coming up. I'm sure all of you have it in your calendars. It's a huge event. And actually, this is interesting. It's the deadline for businesses to have the technology to take the chip readers in their machines. And the reason why there's a deadline, I mean, how is this even enforced? What's happened is the liability will now shift from the credit card companies to the businesses if they don't have this technology. And this is in 2 days. I mean, the October 1st is coming up. I haven't been to very many businesses that have the chip technology yet. I think Target's the only one I've seen. So that's very interesting. And how this will impact us ultimately, I'm not sure, but you could conclude that if the credit card companies aren't covering for any kind of fraud and it's left to the business, then I would surmise that we're dealing with less of a financially secure entity. So it might end up kind of going on to us, the consumer. If so, what I'm saying is I would be, I think this is going to take a while to actually be implemented, even though the deadline's Thursday. But start being aware of what technology the business that you're going to is using. Now, there is this exception. There's gas stations have a couple years in advance to kind of catch up with that, because there's so many. I guess the reasoning is that there's so many actual gas stations that use. They're just too much. It was too much of a burden, so that's not going to be implemented until 2017. And the difference is, the reason why this is important is the magnetic strip that's now on credit cards has been around. That technology has been around since like the 50s or 60s. I mean, it's old technology. It's very easy to access your account number and your expiration date. Pretty much anybody with the right technology. With skimmer, you can buy a skimmer on Amazon for $20. I mean, that in and of itself isn't illegal. What's illegal is how you use it. And so it's one of those, it's like different components created to, basically commit a fraud or any kind of crime. And skimmers, what happens with a skimmer, I don't know how much anybody actually knows what a skimmer is, but essentially it's a device that you put on any reader. It can be put on an ATM, it can be, typically they're on gas stations. So unfortunately now we have the technology, but the skimmers being so common on gas stations. But anyways, the skimmer is not going to be able to, get information off a chip. And one of the differences between the magnetic strip that we have now and the chip is that the chips they generate a unique code every time you use it. So if you go to a merchant and use your chip on the card, it's different every single time. So it's a kind of a layer of protection with the consumer and the credit card companies. The information's still on there, and if someone has your information, they can still, get your credit card and use it. And that's another important thing. The actual credit card itself isn't generally what the bad guys are using. They're using your account information. And what they can do is they can put that account information on the magnetic strip. It doesn't have to match the front, the embossed numbers. Sometimes they're just randomly made up. It doesn't have to match the name. When it goes to the reader, all it's really reading is the magnetic strip, and that's where all your information is. And that's where the bad guys are getting. That's how they're committing these crimes. They have the information. They don't necessarily need the card. And sometimes they use your personal information to get, they'll call the credit card company and say, I lost my card. You know, I have a new address. I moved, and you know, the number one priority is not so much consumer protection or fraud. It's consumer, you know, satisfaction. So they want to make sure that they're getting that stuff out to you. Unfortunately, they don't know it's not you. All right, so here's just some tips that you know, and some of this is just from what I've seen in my cases. Some of it's just from, unfortunately, personal experience. I just got a call, actually it was a text message from Verizon, or what I thought was Verizon, and it was for my internet account, and it said, basically the message was, you've recently changed your security question, which is scary. I mean, that's like that's the question that you use to figure, you know, to basically run all of your secure information. So my first reaction was to, like, you know, I don't know, call the number that they wanted me to call and just deal with it. I was actually speaking to somebody that I know in the banking industry, and they're like, that's a fraud, don't do that. And I'm like, I wanted to. So what I did was, they said, well, they'll send an email to you also. So that's what I did. I checked my email, and then I just went online to what I know was the account login, and saw that there was no change, there was no emails. But my first reaction when I got this text was to call that number, and that's like phishing. They're trying to get you to give information, and that's another thing. Those general alerts that you get that you've changed your password or you've changed your security question, those are the types of things that get people scared, and then they tell you they alert you to a phone number. And you know, and that the first thing they get is your password, because you have to give your old password to change it to a new password. So be highly alert of those types of requests. Monitor your accounts and credit card activity the best you can. I mean, that has been mentioned a few times already. And that can just be simply reading your statement more carefully. I mean, just go through your statement. You know, a lot of times we get it. Look, that looks about right this month. That's about what I'd spend. I've recognized some of those restaurants. Go through it, and because a lot of times these are just small, insidious, you know, transactions that you wouldn't normally catch. Try not to use your debit card. Use it as a credit. And honestly, the reason is simple. It's just, yeah, use somebody else's. No. The idea is really simple. When you're using your debit card, you've generally got a more finite amount in there, and then they just have access to it can create more havoc. When you're using your credit card, there seems to be more protections on the credit card, and you can use your debit card as credit too. Every time your debit card is a credit card. So if you run it, you actually just hit cancel when it alerts for the PIN. If you hit cancel, then it'll recognize it as a credit card. So that's easy. So that way you don't have to use a different card. You just use your debit card, but use it as credit. But if you can, use your credit card. Shred your old bills. I mean, that's, you know, those mailings that you get from your bank or credit card company that say, hey, we've got a great balance transfer thing, and here's some checks to, you know, start this, and here's your account number all over these checks, and you just throw them away. I can get them all. I make a point to, I have a shredder, because I make a point to shred that stuff, because it's got so much information on these things that everyone just throws away all the time. And again, that's all they need is very basic information, and if you got the right technology, they can make a credit card out of that. And the credit cards, by the way, they're not, those credit cards that we all have in our pockets, they're not like special material. I mean, those are the same, that's the same type of, I guess, material as a hotel key, as a gift card. I mean, basically you can get that piece of plastic. You can have an old hotel key and use that and put the credit card information on that magnetic strip, and now you have a credit card. So it's nothing special about how they're made. Let's see what else. Yeah, sure.
Is there a way for me to tell if there's a skimmer on an ATM machine or a gas pump?
Yes. The skimmers, there's different kinds of skimmers. Some are actually dongles, and sometimes they're behind a register, and obviously they're hard to see because usually it's an employee that puts it on there. The skimmers on an ATM, and this is going to, you know, I don't want everyone to be ultra paranoid now, but if your card, the skimmers are usually on the actual, I guess, the place where you put your card in. So if you're noticing that it's extra difficult, you're getting more resistance putting your card in, you know, And what extra pressure that is hard to really quantify, but that means that there could be a skimmer on the ATM. Yeah. And they make the entry a little bit narrower because it's something added on to something that's already there. So it won't feel right. That's one of the keys with that. If you get a communication from a company saying, contact us, your password's changed or this and that, Google the number that they tell you to call, and you'll be surprised how many people will put on the internet, well, I called this number, it's a scam, don't do that. So I guess the point is don't panic when you get these calls and texts. Just take your time, take a deep breath, kind of look at it, check your email to see if you've got another text or other kind of communication indicating that you've been a victim of some sort of fraud. And a lot of this is just being aware. I mean, there's nothing we can do to basically be bulletproof and 100%, just unable to be defrauded. I mean, everyone's information is everywhere. It's really, really hard to hide everything. All you can really do is, sort of take these tips, be a little bit more vigilant of what you're using and where your information is going, and hopefully mitigate anything that can happen to you that's bad. That as far as fraud is concerned. I don't really. Anything else you think I missed? All right. Well, thank you very much for letting us speak to you, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Looking for a contractor or somebody to do work for you, can you really count on when they say licensed and bonded?
No. No, if they say it, no, but what you can do is you can go to the Department of Agriculture, Charles, and on there, their license has to be listed on there, and it will say on there that it's active, and it will also list on there whether there's been any complaints, if they've had any issues. The same with the charity. The Department of Agriculture has jurisdiction. So you can go right on their site, punch in any charity you may want to give to, any type of contractor, which is any modification to your house, electrician, plumbing, Department of Ag, Sunbiz also you can go on, and that will tell you whether or not they are licensed, in addition if there's any complaints. Commissioner?
What
Did you
businesses need to be licensed? Because I'm in a situation now with the county, and they're saying certain professions do need to be licensed and certain don't. So if they're like a general contractor and they're performing all kinds of work, are you up on who needs to be licensed and who doesn't?
It's there's the contractor statute, and it's actually volumes of statutes. And so I don't know specifically what you're talking about, but if you want to give me a call, and I left my business cards up there, if general contractor has to be licensed, if they hire subcontractors, so those subcontractors have to be licensed. If you're not working on your own house, chances are you have to be licensed. Any changes, technically, even if you hire someone to change a faucet, that's a material change to the house. You need a license and a permit. So you're free to call me on whatever it is you're referring to, since you're being a little vague, which is probably a good thing.
I don't want to give the wrong. I actually had this issue come up recently. Somebody was asking me whether or not I think it was like a place that actually cashes checks, whether or not they need a special license for that. I couldn't find that they did, unfortunately, but I want to say I went to the Department of Financial Services website, and they had a list of all the licensing that they basically monitor. So I think that's the right agency, Department of Financial Services. If you Google that and go to their website, they actually have a list of all the different types of things that they monitor as far as what companies and what people need. Because it seems like almost anything. I mean, really, but there probably are exceptions.
As long as they're hiring subs, they need to be licensed.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes, if they're hiring subs as a general contractor, they must be licensed, yes, and that is the Department of Agriculture. Misty?
So I have a daughter who's in Miami as a freshman in college, and her credit card is often refused to, they won't allow her to use it because it's such a high crime area, and they think it's fraud because her address is in Bradenton and she's in Miami. So my question is, are there certain geographic areas or are there common characteristics of these white-collar criminals that you're seeing?
There are geographic areas, and with credit cards, mine got declined recently when I went to, I think it was Kentucky. I slept there. I think there was a mountain. I'm presuming I was in Kentucky. My card was declined too, and so they do use. And that I called the credit card company and said, well, "Why is my card declined?" What they do is because they're self-insured. That they have a very big interest, and they are extremely on the cutting edge of security. Is that they are going to add that protection for you. Is that if there's something that seems out of the ordinary and you don't let your credit card company know that you're traveling, they will sometimes, as a protection, decline it. And so Miami, which is a very high area for high crime with the white collar things, that it will be declined. And it's always one of the credit card companies I talked to recently on my card, it was just to let them know if you're going to be making a big purchase or a purchase that's out of the ordinary, and they're just, that is for their protection because they're going to absorb the cost. They do not have insurance, but they spend a lot of money on security.
Some of the algorithms they use are pretty complicated, and you wouldn't be able to just very easily be able to tell what it is that determine why you're refused. You know, some of them are straightforward, location, whatever, but they use pretty complicated things to try to figure that out.
Ed, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, I thought you were, okay.
Still bothered about his wife still. Sorry.
He's afraid to go home.
Is there still such a thing as a do not call number?
Yes. There is.
I do business
There
all
is.
over town.
Yeah, there's a do not call number. It does not work. But yeah, there is a do not call number. But they violate it all the time. Just to some, I think, Sandy, you mentioned seniors. That is the scariest part of doing this job for me, is that seniors are highly targeted. They're very at risk. Florida is the 5th largest population in the U.S. that has seniors, and it's a beautiful place to live. Why not come here and retire and be able to live out your lives here? The fact is, it makes it a bigger pool for targets. And the older we get, the more likely we are going to be preyed upon. And the cases that we've done, some of the things that I've left with you have been very, very disturbing to me, is that a stranger befriends someone, family lives up north, and they're taking every single penny. And that's the last stages of someone's life. And that has been a very, in one sense, it's rewarding to get justice on it. On the other hand, it is just very disturbing and troubling to me to watch and see what's gone on in the trial that Dan and I did. By the time closing argument came in, I really felt it, what the victim went through for the last couple months of her life, that she worked hard, just retired, and then spent the last couple months in a wheelchair facing the wall of her lanai while her caregiver friend moved in with her criminals and took over everything, including her car, her house. And that's to spend your last months like that before dying really bothered me. And at closing, it was something I felt very strongly about. The jurors and mentioned all the other cases. There's been a lot of cases I've tried that have been violent and burglaries and drugs. Every one of these cases that I've tried, the white collar cases, especially the animals, I've never had jurors wait afterwards and show their outrage for what's happened. That someone is either being ripped off or there's an animal being hurt that's when I really get a lot of jury feedback. So just, where the concern is, and I think Ed's allocated the resources correctly, is that there's a very big pool here and it's getting larger. It's estimated that the fraud business, the greed is a very powerful motivator. It's a $60 billion a year industry in the U.S., and we're the 5th largest, and I think it's 20% of that $60 billion is right here in Florida with the elderly.
I have a question. No. I just wanted to say that, both Lisa and Dan, I'm very grateful for what they do. I think just listening to them tonight, I think you see that there was a need. We certainly have lots of different types of criminal activity, fraudulent activity that occurs in our community. And the need for specialization in this area is very important. And I think when you listen to them talk and you hear about some of the experiences that they have and the type of cases that they work on, they're very passionate, they're very good at what they do. And I think it's tremendously beneficial to our office and to our community to have folks like them that have this skill and this knowledge and this devotion to this trade. So I want to thank both of them. Hopefully tonight you've enjoyed the evening, and if anything, you feel that you're more equipped, more knowledgeable, better informed, so that you're able to prevent these types of activities, and you're vigilant. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.